One, two, three.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin, and can I remind those who've just joined us that Scéalta is a joint Fáilte Fiesta here, Féile an Phobal production. We're a year in the making of Scéalta, and we've had many guests on. We have had people from every section of the community and every quarter in the community. We've had street artists on, we've had politicians, we've had actors, we've had all of those. My guest this evening is Fr Gary Donegan, and he fills all of those criteria. My problem with him, and normally this is a problem that anybody that carries out conversations would die for, is that his life has been so packed with everything that it's difficult to focus on any one aspect of it. So with your consent, Gary, we're going to grass hop from different events and trace you around. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure to see you. And I have to say, you're looking really well. So thank you.
It's great to be with you, Joe. And thank you for the invite. It's an honor to be part of this project. And I'm only too delighted. And just say hello to all who'll be watching in on this. You know, it's great to be part of this adventure.
I was spying on you the other day. I was asking people behind your back to give me stories about you, to try and kind of lace in the different parts that we don't know. And I said, tell me a wee bit about him. And I'm not going to tell you who it was. They said, yeah, that boy's that well known. The Pope asked him for an autograph. And I went, yeah, you know, Mrs. Donegan's boy, Mrs. Donegan's son. With a reference to your mother. And I want to come back to that because that's a phrase that I have first heard you using at one of your many awards. It was when you were leaving Ardoyne and there was an event in the Hogan Centre, and you used that expression to describe yourself. And the great and the good had packed the room as far as you were concerned. This is Mrs. Donegan's son who was here, not anybody famous or notorious. So begin with the beginning. For Manna born, so tell me a bit about that.
Well, I was born in 1964, and I come from a townland called Kilroot, and between Newtown Butler in County Fermanagh and Clonus in County Monaghan. So I was right on the border, and I had an idyllic childhood, blessed with credible parents. Michael, my father, commonly referred to around Fermanagh as Mickey Donegan, even though our name is Donegan, but it's mispronounced even by some of our own family. And Mommy was Christina West. And they ended up, when they got married, lived in Enniskillen, and they were in a house with 24 people. Unbelievable. My granny, Dad's mother, more or less, it was like a mini hotel, but it was all bunched into this big house that was known as Carson's house. That's actually now a car park, believe it or not. But the house was massive. And then Daddy went back to the home place, and Mommy came from a thatched house that used to feature even on postcards in a place called Lahinch, near Crum Castle. And she came from a farming background. My father was one of 13, and he was born and reared in a labourer's cottage. And down from the cottages was the railway house. And so he emigrated to Enniskillen with Mommy, and then bought the house in Kilroot, the railway house. And he was always a very industrious man. And so he was involved in machinery, and he was involved in harvesting silage and hay and stuff and things like that there, and working involved in construction, particularly of agricultural buildings, etc. And he would take land in the County Meath, and he would draw hay and straw back into the north. And then he was always involved. He was involved in the concrete, the lanes, etc., etc. And I worked with him, and many's a many's a Friday night we spent bagging turf on the back of a lorry into fertilizer bags, including my mother. And so we were used to hard work, but it was great. And we were the first family to get the electricity out where I was coming. Now, it's hard to believe, like, I'm 57 on the 19th of June and this year, but you'd probably have to be over 100 to remember that in the city or something. But we had no electricity.
I'm saying our news Catholics get everything.
Well, you see, my father had the first television. It ran off a car battery, and people used to come and to the house, and what we'd say in Fermanagh, which means visiting, not music, but actually visiting the house. And there was a neighbour like Mick Jones, God rest him, used to come down and mind us if Mommy and Daddy went to Clonus for a spin or something. And the only thing that ever seemed to be on the TV was Westerns and Tom Jones. And but I remember a Native American firing an arrow, at a cowboy. And when the cowboy went down, the man in the house that was visiting blessed himself. It was like as if it was actually happening. And so that was it. And then we got the electricity, and there used to be a big bingo in Clonus on a Friday night, and people used to travel from all over, and the whole talk was the Donegans have the electric. And we had electricity, because prior to that it was a Tilly lamp. We were very fancy at one stage. We had a gas one, and then very sadly 71 we lost our home in the fire, and I was just 7 at the time, and we were literally left destitute. I mean, it was abject poverty. We had just the clothes that we were left in, and everything was destroyed. And there was an insurance issue of a cover note, so we lost everything. And Daddy had to start off again. And we lived in a caravan, and all of the children, we were all in the one bed, and the heat was lemonade bottles wrapped in rags. And Mommy and Daddy had a separate room in the caravan, and they had a plastic sheet above, and the condensation used to drip, and that's why they had that. And then we eventually moved into the council house on Clonus Road, and that's where I spent most of my life. And sorry.
No, I want to just ask you, because I know Mark is your hero, and I know that and I've seen you doing it, and I didn't know for quite a while why, but I don't want you to explain now, but I want you to explain later on. But were your 3 sisters and 1 brother? Okay, so was there a competition? Was it a peaceful coexistence? How did you get on as siblings?
Well, the eldest is Attracta, and Attracta is a teacher, and she was born sensible, and she's an exceptional person. She's such a class act, and she's married to Finbar, who's a professor in Coleraine University, but the most modest guy in the world. You'd no more think he was what he was. He carries it very lightly. And they lost their first baby, Michael. Little Michael died after 10 days, but there's Carissa and Ushin, and they're 2. And but Attracta was always doing the right thing. I was always in trouble. I actually got slapped the first day I went to school, aged 4. I was tricked into going, and I was told by Erwins that there was like dodging cars, like you got them Bundoran amusements. So I walked up to the teacher and I said, "Where are these electric cars?" And she said, "Go away, little boy, and play in the sand like everybody else." So I was playing in the sand, and Brian McDermott threw sand in my eyes, so I buried him. And she brought me up and she says, "Put out your hand." And I went to shake hands with her, not realizing I was actually going to get slapped. So the shame of my uncles saying to me, as rural Fermanagh men used to say, "Any slaps today?" To which I proudly said yes. And my poor mother was mortified for one of the many, many times And so Attracta was always getting everything right, and she's an amazing girl. Then there's myself. Then there's Caroline. Caroline's married to Neil, and they have 2 children, Christina May and Garode. And so she works for Donnelly Motors, and Neil is a joiner. And then after me, then is Mark, or after Caroline is Mark. And Mark, up until 1994, where the 2 of us went out, courtesy of the family, because I'd been involved in a bad car accident. The family got together and sent the 2 of us out to the World Cup. And both of us were behind the net when Houghton put the ball in the Tally's net, Ireland being led by Jack Charlton. And we had the trip of a lifetime. But I noticed Mark having a limp, and he wasn't able to keep up an energy with me. And he was an extremely fit guy because he worked with Daddy on the lorries. And but that summer, extensive research, medical research, divulged the fact that he had progressive MS, and hasn't now. He's completely confined to wheelchair, and he. But ironically, he's probably one of the most content and happy people in the life.
Oh,
And
I want to come back to Mark, because I know he is a big influence on your life.
yes.
Mark said, I spoke to people who had an interest, had an understanding of your school days, and they didn't actually say that you were a hooligan. They said that you were extremely bright, and they also said that one of the things about you then, probably to a lesser extent now, was that if something didn't attract your interest, you didn't really pay much attention to it. But on the other hand, that you approached things that you had an interest in with a passion. Was that the same? I mean, did you know, for instance, from through school that you were destined to be a priest? Did that feature early on in your schooling?
No, it's just what do you call it? It was the last thing in the world. I often said there were girls in my class that had a better chance of becoming a priest than me, because there wasn't a thing that I was not directly involved in, in the school. And we had it was a rural school, and it was called St. Eugene's, it's now St. Eugene's College, and it closed after 49 years. And I was the only one ordained in its 49-year history. And that shocked everybody, because there's a man that I have such a profound respect for, and dare anyone say anything about him. But he actually, I got slapped the first day I went to secondary school as well, because I walked in and I saw the 6th-year girls and I fell in love with them all. And I thought, what was the best way to attract them? And God granted me one great gift, and that was ignorance. And so I picked a fight with, God rest him, Francis Herbert Farrell. Francis Farrell used to sit together, and poor Francis was buried on the 3rd of September 2001. Well, the day that I was walking the kids up during the Holy Cross blockade, and couldn't actually attend his funeral. But I was showing off and doing like Sugar Ray Leonard, Bolero punches, but actually, because I'm a southpaw, and I was actually leading Orthodox. But my own sister Attracta grassed on me. She was so ashamed of me. So I ended up the first day. Well, I didn't even get into the first day. It was actually from the assembly I was sent to the office. So the reason that everything changed was on the 22nd of July 1979, the day of the Ulster football final. The O'Hart family from Gortbrannan in Newtown Butler were heading on a fishing trip, and there was a car coming from Donegal. Donegal were playing Monaghan, and the 2 cars met on Mulligan's Sweep. And the largest loss of life that happened in the 6 counties actually happened on that day. 7 died at the scene, and an 8th died. 2 survived the car, the accident, and it was horrific. And Pat Hart was 57, same age as I'm actually going to be, ironically, in June. Vincent was aged 12. Little Dermot was buried on his 10th birthday. And Kevin, the cousin, came from Wales, who had survived the Upper Farm coal tip disaster of the 60s, ironically, to be then tragically killed in that accident. And Fergal was one of my best friends and nicknamed Billy. And he was a very clever, good-looking kid, footballer, everything. And he, within weeks, developed the rarest form of cancer. And at that stage, 79, 80, only a few people had ever had it in Ireland. And basically, this grotesque tumour grew out. But interferon was being pioneered in Scotland by a Dr. Tom McAllister. And there used to be a program, you probably remember it, Joe, called Nationwide, BBC Nationwide. And on that program, it talked about this young fella called Peter, who was getting this. And the same headmaster who said I wouldn't make an altar boy, Brendan Moriarty, he contacted the hospital and persuaded them out of compassion that this child would be brought over. The border was sealed off and the RAF landed a chopper and he was flown to Glasgow. But unfortunately, after 16 days, he died, and it was just horrific. And I was obviously devastated. And I used to walk out every day out to his house and visit him every day. And, I've never played Monopoly in all these years, 40 years later, because we played it all the time just to keep him interested. He was the first person that ever had a remote control TV in the area, because we used to always have to go up and switch the stations. Yeah. And it was just anything to kind of keep him entertained. But he was the bravest person I ever met, and I've met some incredibly brave people. And I used to go out and I would get a lump in my throat and I would go out to the silage pit or the hay shed and I would cry. I'd wash my face and I'd come back in again. And he said to me at one stage, and he wouldn't take the morphine because he knew if he took the morphine, he wouldn't know where he was. But he wanted to be there for his mother and his brother and sister, John and Imelda. And I used to see him squeeze the tumour against the sofa to create a different kind of pain than the pain that he was in. And there's a very iconic picture of him. The track to my sister kept a scrapbook. I have it here in the office. Sometime Joe will get you to come up and you can see the scrapbook. But this wee frail hand is waving goodbye to us, and the courage. And he said to me, "Look after Mommy." That was his mantra. And I used to go up then to the grave and talk to him, and all the family were all buried there. And then I go down to the chapel and I would fight with God. I was so angry with God that he could have allowed this family to be more or less wiped out and leave this woman having lost her husband and now 3 sons and her nephew. But I used to stay there, and the sanctuary light, the red sanctuary light, the church would go into darkness, and the sacristan would go up and again mispronouncing our name, instead of Donegan, say, "Young Donegan, you better go home." And at the same time, Mommy's sister, Tess, was ironically dying of cancer. And she was only a young woman. She was only 39. And there was a big Mayo priest from County Mayo, Father William Hickey, who was about 6'3", a giant of a man, but a very simple man. Like, there wasn't an ounce of guile in this man. He just was so simple. And every time we went in to visit her, the countenance of her face would change. And in his own simplistic way, it would change. And I watched this a few times. And then, people call it the call. And I thought, is this what God wants me to do? And I thought, not a chance. Get rid of that stupid idea. And I fought that even harder, because what I wanted the Audi 80, a bungalow, a nice wee woman with about 5 snuttery children to play football for Fermanagh and box for Ulster. That was all I wanted. And this God thing, where the hell is this coming from? And I fought it until eventually I thought, but sure, I'll get it out of the system. I'll join up and they'll see through me. I won't be holy enough. I won't be clever enough, and they'll throw me out. And 37 years later, I'm actually 38 going on. I'm still here. But it shocked everybody. Out from the poor Mr. Moriarty saying, you wouldn't make an altar boy. I came home and I said to Mommy, and she said, you wouldn't last a fortnight. And if it had been some kind of pious, guy that was involved in doing all the projects school, but the guy that was always in trouble, the guy that was sent to the office all the time, the guy that was acting the mick all the time, so probably the least likely candidate to be what I am.
I want to ask you two things, because I know parallel to you talk about all this trouble that you got into. You're very accomplished in school, which you're quite modest about. You were also a keen boxer, and you also had a number of GAA distinctions, some of which are not really distinctions. They're more jailing offences. But let's just, how did you end up being trained by the Jesuits? How did that come about?
Well, when I joined on the 5th of October 1983, you had to do what was called a postulancy, which was a posh word for searching. So ironically, I was only living 20 miles away from Newton Butler in the Grand Monastery in Enniskillen. And but I might as well been, in Timbuktu, because you got home a week at Christmas and 3 weeks in the summer before you moved on to Dublin. And I used to just happen to be walking down the farm lane, and our family just happened to be driving by when the Green Cross parcel would be handed out, and there were 6 in my class.
It's froze.
And so somebody trying to ring me there. So basically, after the first year, we went to Mount Argus in Dublin, and the Passionists came to Ireland during the starvation, which is euphemistically sometimes referred to as the famine. But it was during the starvation that we came, and so we were there in Dublin, and this was the mother house. So I went there, and Milltown Park was the Jesuit Institute for Philosophy and Theology. And whereas Maynooth was the National Seminary, and kind of it was kind of the party line, it was the diocesan guys, and the guys who were maybe more gifted went to Rome or whatever. We went to Milltown, and Milltown was very much about free thought, which basically spoke to me as well. And that's when I would have been introduced to liberation theology and Lonerganism. And of course, that's what actually appealed to me, was because I've been always very left of center, very much, and especially as someone, who's a religious and a Catholic priest. But the idea of a religious as opposed to a diocesan priest, we were kind of meant to be at the edge and meant to be kind of like stretching boundaries. And even as a student, like I was down with the Dunn Stores workers for the Outspan Oranges, and then myself and another passionate student, we marched on the American Embassy, because there was that infamous time that the 6 Jesuits, the housekeeper and the housekeeper's daughter, were murdered in El Salvador. And so it was always that kind of, some people refer to me as Arthur Scargill, because even though I was the youngest of the students, imagine when we lived in Mount Argus in Dublin, there was 84 of us living in the same house. It was an amazing experience. And Brian Darcy, my colleague now out in Toberware in Crossgar, he was the spear of the house at the time. And there was 84 of us, and it used to take an hour and a half to do the dishes in the evening, such was, but it was one of the happiest times, even though there's such massive numbers of people. And in a sense, when we went to Milltown, then all the religious orders, Palatines, Jesuits, Augustinians, Redemptorists, we all went there. And, the Jesuits were the cream of the intellect of the church. And then the cream of our guys ended up being lecturers there themselves in philosophy and theology. But actually, contrary to many things, I found a tremendous humility in the Jesuits, and I kind of I found them real, Anam Cara soulmates, in the sense, because they wanted to be where the action was. They wanted like Eamon Stack, one of my friends from the time, like he was Harryville, and then he was out and yeah, we played on the same football team together. I have the distinction, not just holding a record suspension of father and son in the GAA.
I want you to cover that.
But I also got sent off playing soccer against Maynooth, just to keep it ecumenical.
Oh, yeah.
So the Milltown was very much that, and you were allowed to expand your mind. And I remember there was like all these professors and scholars, and Milltown Library was one of the most famous libraries. And Papa Francis, Pope Francis, actually went to Milltown to learn English at one stage. And but it was quite an amazing place. And I was like, the last day there, when I finished my I did philosophy, theology, and then I did a postgrad in humanities in All Hallows. But the last day, they asked me to speak. And it was like, and I was a passionist, and I thought, this, but that was them. They picked a passionist, not a Jesuit. They picked a guy that was kind of. They always knew that I was not going to be a guy that was going to sit, writing or study. That it was going to be, very much pastoral with me, and but they enjoyed the humor. And there was a very serious man who was the canon lawyer, and he probably, if he smiled, he was giving his face a hoolie. And Billy Kelly was his name. And in an oral exam, and I used it in the speech that I gave the last day. And Billy Kelly said to me in an oral exam of canon law, he says, "Would you baptize any child?" And I said, "Do you want the truth?" And he said, "No, I'd prefer canon law." And so that was a kind of that, like I have such a time for the Jesuits, and Papa Francis is my hero.
Let me stop you there just for a second, because I want to move you on, and I want to move you sideways almost. And I have to say, for the record, you were an exceptional student. You went through it. 1991, you were ordained. But you've mentioned a few times your loves of sport, and you've mentioned your distinguished career within the GAA. And I want you to tell me briefly, tell me the distinguished, and then tell me the incident with your father and yourself, which is always also quite distinguished. And then I want to take you to Ardoyne. So tell me your GAA career first.
I couldn't have been anything other than a Gael, because it was in the genes, right? And Daddy was the chairman of the club for about 25 years. And he also was county selector with Mick Brewster. That Brewster Park is called after the county ground in Enniskillen. And he was the manager. And ironically, I was playing for Fermanagh Vocationals, the school and everything. And he'd hardly picked me for the local team, because in case it looked like favoritism. Yeah. And the great thing about our family is always grounding you. My mother bought me this beautiful Adidas bag. I still have it, like a kit bag. And I came out one evening to head towards the pitch, and he took one look at the bag and he said, "Who do you think you are, Keegan?" And there was a famous English footballer who was actually discovered by nuns in Scunthorpe as a player, Kevin Keegan, who was the captain of England. And so he gave me like a spar bag, a plastic bag or something, and said, like, more or less, catch yourself on. I wasn't going to go out with the fancy bag, which I actually still have. So it was very much that. And when I went to Roslea School, I was very lucky that there was a man that we were in awe of, the late great Pat King. Pat was actually a legend in Tyrone football and played for Ulster. And he also managed Fermanagh, and a couple of his sons played for Fermanagh and everything. An amazing guy. But he instilled this love. And the very strange thing is, the only manager in all my football career that ever played me as a forward. I always played as a back. And my job was seen as stopping any creativity. When I was being in a game training for Fermanagh Minors, Peter McGinnity was the manager. And he pulled me aside at one stage and he said to me, "Remember, you're on this team not because you're Pat Spillane." Now, Pat Spillane was a record number all-star with Kerry. I think he has about 9 Celtic crosses, 9 All-Irelands to his name. A very, very skillful player. And basically what McGinnity was saying to me was, you're there to stop people. But Pat King brought out the creativity side. And he was our teacher, but he was our hero, because you go to Clonus and see that was our teacher playing for Tyrone or playing for Ulster, and we could never really see him as a teacher, and he instilled that. And so we played, and there was some incredible players on the team that I was actually playing with from Roslea. But the big thing was, I was forever in fights, because I went to school in Roslea, and most of my Newton Butler teammates went to school in Lisnaskea. So I would play for Roslea School against Lisnaskea, go out to training for Newtown, and get involved in trying to hold my own against my own teammates. Then I would play for Newton Butler against Roslea parish team, and then go back to school in Roslea.
And get
So what would happen is, Mrs. Lynch had a filling station, so Dervin, diesel and petrol, and a wee shop, a wee sweetie shop. And the fights would be organised, and the crowd would gather, and you'd be full on, and then some teacher's car come across, and the crowd would move in and move out, and nobody would be caught. So hence it was great training for going to Ardoyne.
Yes, absolutely. So tell me about the unsurpassed record of you and your father both hold. And tell me briefly, because I want to talk about Ardoyne.
Okay. Well, Daddy has these enormous hands, incredible hands. And he was the manager. In those days, Sunday, the suit would be on for Mass, and then the game would be on afterwards, and he had the Sunday suit on. And we were playing Lisnaskea, and this cousin of mine, God rest him, who's dead since, was flying up the wing, and he got kicked in the gut. And I thought, I better go and rearrange that guy's features that did that. So on the way to do him, this older man shouted from the side of the pitch, "You're like all the Donegans, only a tramp." Now, I realised he meant our family. So I thought, your man will wait, I'll get him first. And as I ran, your man made a big, very exaggerated swing. And I ducked, and I threw him up on my shoulder. And I was heading towards Stingy Nettles to throw him in the nettles. And I could hear John James Cahy shouting, "Run, young Donegan, throw," and then he used an expletive, the certain person in the nettles. But as I was nearing that, I got punched from behind, and it was another son of the man. And then there was a full-scale battle, and somebody said to me, "Watch your old boy go." And that's when Daddy came into his own. And the game was abandoned. The parish priest was out in the middle of the pitch. The guy that hit me tried to actually come through the dressing room, which was made of corrugated iron, and the window was a missing piece of corrugated iron. There was no door in the dressing room because a guy had broken his leg about 2 years beforehand, and the boys broke the door down, tied him to the door, and put him in the back of a estate car and drove him to the hospital in Enniskillen. The door was never replaced. So it was very, very, very fancy, highbrow stuff that I was involved in. But anyway, basically, we got a letter from the Ulster Council, beautiful letter, nice cream with a lovely brown embossed from the Ulster Council. And Daddy and I got 12 months. And we weren't allowed even inside the ground. We're known as the men behind the wire. And that was that. And the part about this was, after I joined, the man coming, who was John Kern, he had a pub in Listenskey, and he came over to me and he put his arm around me and he says, "I am so sorry what I did." And I said, "What did you do, John?" He says, "I was going to hit you and you going to be a priest and all that." I says, "Catch yourself on, sure, I was as bad as you." And he brought me in to the pub and gave me a lemonade and a friendship between him and his family that lasts to this day. And Listenskey won the championship in 1991, and I was the guest of honour, ironically. And Mickey Linden, one of the down players, was there with the Sam Maguire. And the act of reconciliation was that I had to take Mrs. Kern out for a dance, the same as a bride and groom's first dance. And I danced them round. And life is stranger than fiction. Tragically, their daughter was killed in an accident. And I remember going up to the house, and the fella, Sean, that had hit me from behind, he had emigrated to England. And I said, having spoken to them all, and I said, "Where's Sean?" And they said, "He's behind you." And I ducked, and everybody laughed. And they said it was the only time they smiled during the whole wait time. And then finally, the story, I was down in Wexford and came back. This friend of mine's child had been born, emergency, and I went in to visit wee Niall McLaughlin, wee baby Niall at the time. And when I went in, the other bed, there was this big, tall man standing there. And he walked over in front of all these visitors that was there, and he said, "Hi, boy, you don't have to too far to go to the hospital tonight." And I said, "And you have less to go for the priest." And we threw our arms around each other. He was Sean Kern, the guy that had hit me from behind. And that's the beauty of the GAA.
It sounds to me, and I am sure it'll sound like this to anybody who's listening and who's ever met you, that all your life you've been trained to go to Ardoyne. It was never just a coincidence, because you had all the ingredients you need in Ardoyne. You had a direct line with God, you had two left hands, and you could bite and kick. So where else were they going to send you?
That's true.
2000, what year did you go to Ardoyne? 2001, I believe.
2001, yeah.
Tell me, I'm rapidly running out of time, by the way, I should add that with you. But how did you, was it your worst nightmare? Was it an adventure? Was it somewhere you wanted to be? I know you'd heard of Ardoyne, but did it not frighten you?
The thing about it was that I think everybody had, a certain romantic attachment to Ardoyne down through the years because, you know, of what had been happening during the struggle and during the conflict, during the Troubles. And no more than I. And of course, the Passionists were there since 1869, the first religious order to run a parish in the whole island of Ireland. And but I was given missions and retreats and school retreats, and I loved it. And I was living out of a hold on, and I was going all over the place. And truth be told, I probably should have been made superior of the house in Enniskillen. But to use the colloquialism, I got shafted by the Passionists. And it was against my will that I got sent to Ardoyne. But I've always learned in life that out of adversity, you make something happen and make something good. Now, I could not have believed that at the time when I went there, because it had been very quiet. But I was, again, ironically, I arrived there on Friday, and to ease me in, they gave me a funeral on Monday. So it was like you hit the ground running. And I was actually walking down the ramp that leads up to the church when a British soldier shouted, "Hoy, Father," or Padre, I think he called me, "run." So I hoisted up the habit and ran back up. And there was a controlled explosion, and they blew up a waste basket thing. And then, of course, on my birthday, the 19th of June, I was in Dublin being trained by Terry Prone, famous journalist, by Core. Core had sent me there, the Conference of Religions of Ireland, to be one of 5 to be trained to do media work. And so Car Communication were training us. And I lifted up the Evening Herald, and I saw Jared McGuigan, Sinn Féin councillor, looking back at me, and I thought, what's he doing in the Evening Herald? And when I opened it, that was the day that the Holy Cross blockade had happened. And it was my birthday. And instead of going out to Eddie Rockets in a movie that was planned, I raced back to Ardoyne and was right in the midst of all of that. And I arrived 6 months before my predecessor as parish priest and superior, Aidan Troy. And during the summer, we tried to resolve this, and it wasn't happening. And then Aidan came home, go on holidays, having just finished a licentiate in Rome. And so I met him at Dublin Airport, and we're not waged at 57, but on 57, I'm still relying on pocket money. But I had his pocket money for his holidays. So I met him at the Dublin Airport Hotel, and I had a list of things. I remember they were all written in red ink. And the primary one, of course, was the Holy Cross blockade. And then the two of us on the 3rd of September 2001 decided that we'd be a sign of contradiction. So we actually put on our Passionist habits over our clothes. And of course, the rest became history, because literally even people who were hardened to what had been happening, children were kind of sacrosanct during the Troubles, but the children were isolated in this. And we walked up, and the vitriolic hatred and the spittle and the stones and bits of rebar. I have a cut on the back of my head. And at that stage, believe it or not, I was about 3 stone heavier than I am now, and I had a big Grizzly Adams beard. When I got up to the school, that was all covered in gob spittle, and I was actually trying not to, and I had to wash that off my face. And I saw those children, and I thought, no matter what the reasoning is, how can you do that to children? So Aidan and I made the decision that this is what we were actually going to do. And for those 3.5 months or whatever it was, we literally walked every day. And I didn't miss a single day during that, and you're up and down. By the time you did the turn, it was like 6 times a day, and then he and I then came under death threats, and I think that's what won over people, because we were able to put liberation theology into action with the priests of the street. I nicknamed the priest with the jeans, and recently I had to go in, and I only have one clerical shirt, and I couldn't find the collar of it to go into the hospice. And the reason I had the clerical shirt, because of I was invited last year to Washington by Nancy Pelosi to lead the invocation at the speaker's lunch, but the habit was our thing, and it went over the jeans or jumper, whatever it was. In fact, actually, what I did, and this is fact, I wore a Fermanagh jersey, and I have a major collection of them. And I wore a Fermanagh jersey, and I thought, if anything happens to me, and I'm taken out or whatever like that there, and I'm brought down to the matter or something, and they're cutting the thing, the first they'll see is the Fermanagh jersey on.
I apologize at the beginning for jumping you forward and backward and all of that, but
that's great.
For those who are watching, the reason for that is that obviously they've gathered by now that any one section of your life is an interview or a conversation. So let alone trying to squeeze it, meloging it all into 1 hour. I want to mention 2 things, and then we're coming into the tail end of our conversation, only because time is a dictator here rather than me or you. You mentioned the children and the plight of the children during that period in the Holy Cross. And you mentioned the difficulties in Ardoyne. You mentioned your many, or one of your many, many encounters with British troops. And for a long time, you couldn't see, I think, the obvious that other people close to you could see, and that was the price that you physically and mentally were paying for these activities, that you were under tremendous pressure, and it was relentless pressure. There probably wasn't a night when you weren't either on the Crumlin Road on duty, or in Ardoyne at a wake, or saying a mass for someone who died in circumstances. During that period, you honed and you're renowned for your skills as a negotiator. And in fact, you've received awards for your skill as a negotiator, for that patience, for that kind of insight, for just being good at dealing with people. You also got a black eye for negotiating, I can remember on one occasion. And so this is going to be a first. This is going to be the exposure. This could be your downfall, by the way, Father Gary.
Yes.
When you got the black eye, did you turn the other cheek, or did you throw a left hook?
I come out of retirement and I delivered something, because in that particular scenario, I was on my own. There was others in the room, and they were carrying things that were quite heavy.
Yes.
And basically, I turned to speak to the senior person among that group. When I turned round, that's when I got the dirty blow, and it was a bit like rite of passage. And I thought, I don't want these guys to think I'm Dougal at her father Ted. I don't want to think that I spend my evenings crocheting and knitting. I want them to see, who is in the room with them. And let's put it this way: he wasn't eating apples for a while.
I want to move on to and you might not want to speak about this, and maybe you do, but I just think I'd like to speak about it on your behalf, if it's possible. 2016, you, in theory, you moved from Ardoyne to Crossgar. Your health is not great. In fact, the truth be told, you almost died. And, if you believe in miracles, every day that you're here is a miracle. And I went to the event in the Hoban Centre and I listened to you speak. You received a accolades from everybody. The 26 county government was there, the local Protestant clergy were there, and all of that. And you said something which I have never heard a priest say before, and it kind of stuck with me. You talked about a Protestant minister going home with an award and showing it to his family and to his kids and to his wife. And you said, you know, Mrs. Donegan will be really proud of that. And you said it funny because you've got a great sense of humor. But you know, maybe this is me reading into it, I kind of detected that there was nearly a loneliness there. Now that sounds a contradiction when we're speaking about you. I want to give people a bit of advice. If they meet you in the city centre in Belfast, don't walk down the city centre with you, because whatever their plans were and wherever they were trying to go, the shops will be closed and the pubs will be empty, because you can't walk 5 steps without someone looking at a photograph, including orange men, as I know on one occasion, or people just stopping you and asking for advice. Can it be a lonely station to be, even of your notoriety and your wide circle of friendship? Can it be a lonely station to be a priest?
Yeah, and I think that I believe now that more so now, through maybe the example of some priests, they're more honest about that. And I believe that in order to be able to exist with the sacrifice of celibacy in your life, that you have to form very strong friendships, men, women, right across the board. I'm very blessed and lucky to have extremely wonderful family, and like the one person I didn't mention in that kind of introduction is the youngest in the house, Michaela. Michaela's a very straight speaker, and she's the main carer at home. She does exemplary kind of work at home, and but you never get above your station in our house. There was recently, I was on something on the TV, and I rang home and I was saying, well, did you see the thing on the TV? No, sure, we were having our tea. You know, most other families would watch their son or whatever they got there. That doesn't happen in our house, right? And they're all very much like that. You sense undoubtedly the pride and all that, but there's no saccharine. They certainly don't put it on with a trowel. It's a no-one thing, and it's about that. But the reality is, it has never sat easy with me. I would want a significant other. I would want children. I live with the sacrifice every day of my life. An example being, and it was in that documentary, The Priest with the Genes. And basically, there's actually footage that they found. I couldn't believe they actually found it. I went to the scene of a murder, and I was coming away from it, and I was traumatized, but I wasn't aware as much at the time. But what I did do is I went back down to the monastery, and our rooms are iconically called cells. And I think that's maybe why I've always had such an affinity with ex-prisoners, because of the regime, because of the nature of a system, a horarium, all that kind of stuff is very similar in that way. But I often said the cell imprisons you more emotionally than anything. And I got down that night and I lay on the bed and I took a pain down this side, and there was nobody to hold. There was nobody to cry with. There was nobody to make you a drink. There was nobody to talk to. And the next day, both the police and then the media were there, and at one stage there happened to be a doctor, and he said that your body probably protected you from taking a stroke at night by creating that pain and thing down the side because of the strain. And that just was one, moment of isolation. And I suppose the big thing then was like carrying. I was hit with water cannon about 8 years ago, and I developed pneumonia. And against my wishes, the order sent me to Berkeley, San Francisco, and I did a sabbatical there. And I was adopted by the Irish community, especially two beautiful people, Mary Staunton, whose father played on the Cursed Mayo team, 53, and she has the Celtic Cross, and Redmond Lions. And they took me in. But the Irish community, Jim Byrne, the attorney, all these people were incredible. But I had to go on a retreat, a place called Bear Creek, and there was no signals, no phone, no nothing. And literally on the very day that I flew out that night, I was with God rest him, Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson at a suicide prevention centre, and working with them. And it was the second night that I was in this cabin. It was a log cabin. It was at the end of the woods. Of course, I had to get the one at the very far end. And I was there. And I woke up terrified, and literally like what you would see in movies. My hair and body was wet, and even the pillow and the sheets and everything. And what was happening was I was getting flashbacks. And my little nephew, baby Michael, died in the Royal and was in an incubator. But my imagery was I was floating above all these cots, and they were babies' bodies, but they were the heads of people who had either taken their lives or had died as a result of the Troubles. And that's when I eventually got the courage to go and seek the help that I needed, because I had watched the film Hurt Locker about 6 months before this, and I had this kind of eureka moment because I saw in the lead character who just kept taking bigger and bigger risks towards the end of his tour. I found that my way of dealing with trauma was more trauma.
Yeah, I've seen you doing that. I've seen you doing that in Ardoyne. I've seen you doing it with Orange Parades. I've seen you doing it in confronting people who were there to cause trouble. And I've seen you walking into the lion's den. And I've seen you doing it despite the advice around you. That's why I made the point earlier on. Our producers tell me I'm out of time, but we're not going to stop. No. I want to ask you to, and you need to do what I can't do. You need to answer these succinctly. Okay. So the first thing, you talked about your brother Mark, and you talked about, and I've heard you talking about him before, and you've talked about his everyday struggle, with illness, and does he inspire you? Is he something there it's the reserve in your tank when you can't?
A very short answer to that in terms of Gary Short was, on one occasion, Daddy went up to the border to get euro, and he had toileted Mark, and Mark had got the beta interferon, ironically, injection, which left him very stiff. There's only Mommy and him in the house. And Mommy went out to the lorry, and she got a rope, and she put it around the wardrobe and around the bottom of the toilet bowl. And she put gloves or socks actually in her hands and his hands, and she pulled him out of the bed, and she dragged him across, and she toileted him, cleaned him. And it's the only time that we know that he visibly cried. And he looked up at her and he said, "Mommy, you'll get to heaven for looking after me." Like I've studied epistemology, methodology, phenomenology, and all the ologies and all the different things that I have, but I'll never deliver a better homily. And the fact that he could surrender himself into her care, that this was his mother, he was completely exposed. It reminded me of the Pietà of the broken Jesus taken down naked off the cross into his mother's arms. And this was my brother. And, you know, I remember wheeling him at a papal audience. And because I had the habit on, the Swiss Guard were Monsignore, Monsignore. And we were getting right up, and we were like center stage. And it was Papa Benedict at the time. And he was going round in the Pope Mobile. And I looked down at my brother. And I thought, if they realised who I was wheeling, they'd be waving at him and not at him. And that's the privilege of being his brother.
I find that very emotional, and I know you do as well. 35 years a priest, 35 years a professional boxer, and 35 years a mediator, and 35 years all of that. So in one sentence, if that's possible, when I'm doing this interview with you in another 35 years, and you may well be one of those people in the pointy hats, I doubt it, but where will you be? If you could predict, where will you be in 35 years? Will you be fighting, battling? Will you be retired?
No, the passionists in this 30, the passionists, we don't retire. Diocesan priests and regular priests retire at 75. We go out in the saddle as religious, and that's what I'd like to, whether it's illness or whether it's old age or whatever it be, that you go out with the boots on. And the only reason that it makes the sacrifice worthwhile is love. And we're only conceived for one thing in life, and that is love. So whether it is the very pious people that I meet, and deeply religious people, or whether it's many of my friends who are atheists, and I find sometimes their company much easier, and I find myself much closer, because I kind of radiate towards their honesty, but also the fact that they're constantly searching as well. An atheist friend of mine said one time, "Gary, do you ever have any doubts?" So I explained a couple of very challenging times that I had, and I was very honest with him. And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Since meeting you, I doubt there might be a God." So if I was to kind of say a legacy thing out there, is that by trying in the very limited way that who I am, that it would be that people would go, having met him, I doubt there might be a God. That somehow the witness thing, that's why Pope Francis has almost brought me to some extent mainstream again, because of the fact that he's so apostolic. But what attracts me so much is Francis made so many mistakes, and it's almost like as if he's living out penitentially, trying to rectify the wonderful Jesuits that he didn't support, and he was very much the company man, and he was very much, but he then saw the error of his ways, and he becomes the wounded healer. And I think that often the greatest part of us is our woundedness. And I think that sometimes when you can share your vulnerability and your ordinariness, then that's what attracts people, and they say, well, maybe there's something in this God thing.
I need to sign off, and you couldn't have signed off in better words, but I want to sign off with asking you to do me a favor. The next time you're talking to Mrs. Donegan, you tell her son turned out all right. So, Father Gary, Thank you. You've been a wonderful conversationist. Thank you.
God bless, and God bless everybody that's watching. Loved it, and as always, Joe, love spending time with you. God bless you.